Mafia boss caught her crying on his mother's grave. She whispered, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." The night air was cold enough to steal the breath in the absolute crushing quiet of Calvary Cemetery. The air did not just bite, it had teeth, and it tore at the thin fabric of Emily Carter's jacket. She ignored it. The cold was a distant, unimportant fact, a buzzing noise in a room full of screams. Her focus was singular, locked on the monolith of polished black granite that seemed to absorb what little moonlight broke through the clouds. Maria Moretti, beloved mother. The stone was new, the edges still sharp, the inscription so fresh it looked like it could be wiped away, but it was real. The finality of it was a physical weight, pressing down on Emily's chest until her lungs ached. She knelt on the damp grass, her knees soaking through the cheap denim, her fingers, chapped and red from antiseptic soap, traced the carved letters of Maria's name. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words catching in her throat, dissolving into a choked sob. Tears, hot and stinging, finally broke free, trailing down her cheeks and dripping onto the stone. "I tried, I really did. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." She wasn't talking about the illness. The illness was a force of nature, a relentless tide that pulled Maria away from shore. Emily was apologizing for the rest of it, for the indignities, for the call button left unanswered for an hour, then 2, for the rough hands of the rotating staff who saw only a task, not a person, for the loneliness that had settled over Maria in those final, sterile-smelling weeks. Emily had been her hospital aide, a low-wage worker in a high-stakes world, paid to change linens and fetch water, but she had given so much more. She had given her time, her lunch breaks, her quiet presence. She had brushed Maria's hair. She had listened to her stories. And in the end, she had failed to protect her from the slow, grinding apathy of the system. A sound split the silence. A heavy footstep on the gravel path just behind her. Emily froze. Her entire body went rigid. This was a private cemetery, yes, but it was still part of the city. It was nearly midnight. No good came from being a woman. Alone, in the dark. She wiped her face frantically, scrubbing the tears away with the heel of her hand as she rose to her feet. "Do not move!" The voice was not a request. It was a command. Low and serrated, like gravel pouring over silk. It seemed to come from the darkness itself, and it pinned her in place more effectively than any physical restraint. A shadow detached itself from the larger darkness of the cypress trees. It moved with a predator's grace, silent on the grass until it stood between her and the path. The man was tall, impossibly so, and broad. The moonlight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the cut of a dark, expensive wool coat, and the profound, absolute stillness of his expression. He was grieving. She could see it in the hollows under his eyes, the tension in his mouth, but he was also dangerous. The air around him vibrated with a contained power that made the hair on Emily's arm stand on end. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an accusation. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm nobody." "Nobody," he repeated, the word flat, devoid of emotion. He took another step, close enough now that she could smell the faint, clean scent of expensive cologne and cold night air. "Nobody's cry at my mother's grave in the middle of the night. You're a reporter? One of those vultures?" "No," she said, shaking her head, the motion too fast, too frantic. "No, I swear I'm not. I knew her." His eyes, dark and unreadable, narrowed. Knew her? How? This was it. The moment of truth. She could lie, try to run, but his gaze held her captive. She owed Maria this much. "My name is Emily Carter," she said, her voice trembling but finding a kernel of strength. I was her aide. At the hospital. I was with her. At the end." The man's stony expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. The aggression that had radiated from him subsided, replaced by an intense, burning scrutiny. He was Lorenzo Moretti. She had never met him, but Maria had kept his picture by her bed, the young man in the photo, smiling stiffly in a graduation gown, had hardened into this man. The man who, according to hospital whispers, ran the entire city from the shadows. The man whose name made doctors nervous and administrators compliant. Lorenzo studied her, his gaze sweeping over her thin jacket, her worn-out sneakers, the tear tracks still glistening on her pale cheeks. He saw her fear, but he also saw the genuine, agonizing sorrow in her eyes. It was a mirror of the cold, hollow thing that had taken up residence in his own chest. This was not an act. This was not a reporter looking for a scoop. This was real. "You were the aide," he said, the statement thick with realization. His mother had mentioned an aide, a kind girl, the only one, she'd whispered, who still saw her as a person. "Yes," Emily whispered. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant wail of a siren, a reminder of the city that churned just beyond the cemetery walls. "Stay," Lorenzo said, the words softer this time, but no less a command. "Tell me." "Tell you what?" "Everything." He gestured toward the grave. "You said you couldn't save her. What did you mean?" Emily hesitated. This was the son, the mafia boss, a man whose anger was legendary. Telling him the truth could be dangerous. But looking at the cold, beautiful stone, she felt a flare of that same protective anger that had gotten her in trouble in the first place. He deserved to know. Maria deserved for him to know. She was neglected, Emily said, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess them. The hospital, it wasn't just the illness, Mr. Moretti. They were short-staffed, they said, but it was more than that. They were cruel, not with their hands, but with their time. They left her alone. They didn't answer her calls. They treated her like she was already gone. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. A single muscle ticked. "Go on." "I tried," Emily said, her voice cracking. "I filed 2 reports. I spoke to the charge nurse. I told them she was in pain, that her medication was late. I told them she was developing a bed sore because they weren't turning her. They told me to mind my own business. They said if I kept making waves, I'd be fired. They said I was just an aide. What did I know?" She was crying again, but this time from a place of deep, burning rage. "The last week, I stayed after my shifts. I'd clock out and just sit with her, so she wouldn't be alone, but I couldn't be there every minute. The day she died, I wasn't there. I was scheduled off, and I just know they left her. I know it." She looked up at him, expecting. She didn't know what. She didn't expect the look in his eyes. It was not just anger. It was a cold, pure, focused rage that was terrifying in its stillness. He looked like a man calculating the cost of burning down a building and finding it acceptable. Emily's breath hitched. She had seen men get angry before. Her ex, Mark. His anger was loud and explosive, and always directed at her. It always ended in bruises, emotional or physical. She saw the storm gathering in Lorenzo Moretti, and her survival instincts, honed by years of walking on eggshells, screamed at her. He was angry at the hospital. She knew that. But men like this, their anger was a wildfire. It burned everything in its path. She was in its path. I have to go," she stammered, taking a step back. "I didn't dismiss you," he said, his voice a low growl. "Please," she begged, holding up a hand. "I shouldn't have said anything. I'm sorry. Please, just let me go." She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and ran. Her sneakers skidded on the wet gravel, and she nearly fell, but she scrambled upright and kept going. Not looking back, she ran through the ornate iron gates and didn't stop until she hit the sidewalk, her lungs burning, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Lorenzo watched her go. He made no move to follow. He stood by his mother's grave for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones, but he didn't feel it. He felt only the ice-hot rage that Emily Carter had ignited. A moment later, another man, dressed in a suit that was nearly as fine as Lorenzo's, materialized from the shadows by his side. "Boss, you saw her," Lorenzo said. "Yes, follow her. I want to know everything, where she lives, where she works, who she talks to. I want to know what she ate for breakfast." Lorenzo finally turned, his eyes like chips of obsidian. and I want to know who silenced her." "And the girl?" the man asked. "Do not let her see you. Do not approach her, but do not let her out of your sight. She's walking into a storm. Make sure she isn't hurt by it." "Understood." The man vanished as silently as he had arrived. Lorenzo looked back at the grave. "I'm sorry, Mama," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely allowed himself. "I will fix this. I will burn it all down for you." Emily didn't stop running until she was 3 blocks away, collapsing onto a bench at a bus stop, her body shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The bus finally rumbled to a stop, its headlights cutting through the darkness. She fumbled in her pocket for the bus fare, her hands trembling. An hour later, she was home. Home was a generous word. It was a room at the Crestview Motel, nestled between a pawn shop and a 24-hour liquor store, with a view of the highway. She paid by the week, and the week was up tomorrow. She had exactly $9.42 in her pocket, and nothing in the bank. She unlocked the door, a flimsy thing with a chain lock that was more decoration than security. The room smelled of mold, stale cigarette smoke, and the faint, acrid tang of industrial bleach. A single fly-specked bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over the peeling brown wallpaper and the bed with its pilled, stained coverlet. Emily leaned against the door, her eyes closing, the terror of the cemetery encounter finally giving way to the crushing, familiar weight of her life. She was so tired, tired of being poor, tired of being scared, tired of being alone. Her phone, an old model with a spiderweb of cracks across the screen, buzzed on the nightstand. She dreaded looking at it. It was never good news. She picked it up. A new message. From Mark. "I know you're still in the city. M. Saw your friend from the diner. You think you can hide from me?" Another buzz. A new message. "You owe me. You think you can just walk away after everything I did for you?" Another. "I'm going to find you. You better have my money." Emily sank onto the edge of the lumpy mattress, her stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. Mark, her ex, the man who had charmed her, then isolated her, then bled her dry. The man whose temper had cost her the apartment, whose drinking had cost her the job she'd had before the hospital. She had run from him 6 months ago, with nothing but a backpack and the clothes on her back. And he was still looking. She shut off the phone, plunging the room into silence. But she couldn't shut off the fear. She was trapped. Trapped by poverty, haunted by her past. And now, she had just confessed her deepest, most dangerous secret to a mafia boss. She lay back on the bed, fully clothed, and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling, a shape like a grasping hand, and prayed for a sleep that she knew wouldn't come. Sometime after 3 a.m, sleep had finally claimed her, a shallow, restless doze filled with shadows and whispers. She was dreaming of Mark's angry face, of Lorenzo Moretti's cold eyes, when a sound jolted her awake, a scrape, at her door. She sat bolt upright, her heart stopping. The room was pitch black. She held her breath, listening, scrape, jiggle. Someone was testing her lock. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded her system. It was him. It was Mark. He'd found her. She scrambled off the bed, backing away until her shoulders hit the cold, damp wall of the bathroom. She fumbled for the light switch, then stopped herself. No light, no sound. The doorknob rattled violently. Then, a splintering crack. The cheap wood of the door jamb gave way. The door swung open, the broken chain lock swinging uselessly. A figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the motel's ugly orange parking lot lights. "Emily?" The voice was slurred, angry. "I know you're in there. You bitch. You can't hide from me." "Mark." Emily clamped a hand over her own mouth to stifle a scream. She slid into the bathtub, curling into a tight ball, making herself as small as possible, pulling the thin, plastic shower curtain around her. She was shaking so violently she thought her bones might rattle. He stumbled into the room, his form a lurching shadow. "Where are you? I smell you. You're here." He kicked the bed. He knocked the lamp off the nightstand with a crash. He was drunk. Drunk and mean. "Come on, Em. Don't make this harder." He was feet away. He was going to find her. This was it. Suddenly, The open doorway was filled again, but this was a different shadow. It was not lurching, it was solid, controlled, and fast. There was a grunt. A wet, sickening thud, the sound of a body hitting the floor, hard. Then, silence. A heavy, terrifying silence. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming from under her lids. "Please," she whimpered, the sound barely audible. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside the shower curtain. A hand reached out and pulled the curtain back. Emily looked up, her vision blurred by tears, into the face of Lorenzo Moretti. He was not breathing hard. His dark suit was immaculate. He looked down at her, a small, broken thing hiding in a dirty bathtub, and his expression was unreadable. Then he looked at Mark, who was unconscious, but breathing, on the floor. A flicker of profound disgust crossed his features. He turned his attention back to Emily. He held out a hand. She flinched. His hand remained. Steady. "He will not hurt you again." She stared at his hand, then at his face. He was the man from the cemetery. The man who commanded shadows. The man who had, just now, appeared in her moment of deepest terror. "Come," he said, his voice soft, but edged with the same steel as before. She took his hand. His grip was warm, strong, and sure. He pulled her to her feet with no effort at all, pulling her out of the tub, out of the bathroom, past the body of her ex. He didn't let go of her hand as he led her out of the motel room and into the cold night air, where a sleek black car sat idling, its engine a low, powerful purr. One of his men held the door open. Emily stopped, her feet rooted to the pavement. "What? What are you doing?" Lorenzo turned to face her. He looked at the moldy motel, at the flickering neon sign, at the broken door to her room. Then he looked at her. "You're coming with me," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "You don't belong in this kind of hell." The car ride was silent, a cocoon of black leather and tinted glass moving through the city's glittering, indifferent streets. Emily sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. The adrenaline from the motel was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep tremor and the cold, metallic taste of shock. She hadn't said a word. Neither had he. He was a profile in the darkness next to her, all sharp angles and imposing stillness. Lorenzo Moretti. He had dispatched Mark with a terrifying, almost casual efficiency. One moment, Mark was a monster in the doorway. The next, he was a heap on the floor. Lorenzo hadn't even broken a sweat. And then, he had pulled her from that hell. And she had, like a mesmerized, terrified sheep, gotten into his car. The car didn't go to a sprawling estate, not to a mansion hidden in the hills. It slid into a subterranean parking garage, and a private elevator opened directly, with a soft electronic hiss, into his home. It was a penthouse, but it felt more like a fortress. The walls were glass, revealing a panoramic view of the city's skyline that stretched for miles. It was beautiful, but the height was dizzying. The furniture was minimal, expensive and cold, all dark wood, chrome, and black leather. There were no photographs, no clutter, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was the cleanest, most sterile place she had ever been. Emily stopped in the center of the vast living room, the plush, dark rug feeling strange under her worn sneakers. She was a stain here, a piece of grit in a perfect machine. Lorenzo walked past her, shrugging out of his long wool coat and tossing it onto a chair. He was in a perfectly tailored dark suit, the white of his shirt bright in the low light. "There's a guest room down the hall," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "You can use the shower. There are clothes. I can't stay here." Her voice was a rasp, but it cut through the silence. He stopped, his back to her. "You're not going back to the motel," he said, not turning around. "You don't get to decide that." She felt a sudden, reckless surge of defiance. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the familiar, hot sting of anger. "I don't want your pity. I don't want this." She turned and marched back toward the elevator, her hand jabbing at the button to call it. Nothing happened. She realized, controlled by a keypad. "I'm not leaving," Lorenzo said. She spun around. "What?" "I'm not leaving this apartment, and neither are you. You can't keep me here." He finally turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark. "No? What will you do, Emily? Go back to that room. Wait for him to wake up. He knows where you are. He knows you're alone." "So what?" she shot back, her voice rising, shaky but fierce. "I've been taking care of myself for years. I don't need another man telling me what to do, where to go. I'm not trying to—" "Yes, you are." She took a step toward him, her small frame vibrating with a desperate, trapped energy. "You think because you handled him that I owe you something? That I'm yours to protect now? I don't want this." She gestured at the opulent, empty room. "I want to go." "No." It was a simple word, flat, final. "Move," she said, trying to push past him to get to the elevator he was now blocking. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, a solid, immovable object. "Move," she shouted, shoving at his chest with both hands. It was like shoving a brick wall. Her palms hit the hard plane of his torso, and he didn't give a millimeter. "Emily, stop." His voice was low, dangerous. Tears of pure, frustrated rage sprang to her eyes. "Or what?" she spat. "Are you going to hit me, too? Is that the next step? You're just like him, aren't you? You're all the same." The accusation hung in the air, electric and toxic. "You're just part of the problem," she whispered, her fight collapsing, leaving her shaking. "Violence, control, that's all you know." Lorenzo looked at her, and the cold, hard mask of the mafia boss finally cracked. He saw her. He truly saw her, not just as a witness to his mother's neglect, but as a cornered animal, all instinct and terror, fighting a battle she had been losing for a very long time. She wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid of the entire pattern. He took a slow, deliberate step back from the elevator, raising his hand slightly in a gesture of surrender. "You're right," he said. The admission stunned her into silence. "I do use control," he continued, his voice quiet, lacking the edge it had held before. "In my world, it is a necessary tool, but I am not him." He walked over to the massive window, turning his back to her, a strategic move to give her space. The city lights reflected in the glass, painting his silhouette. "I'm not offering pity. Emily, I am offering a transaction." He turned back to face her, his hands clasped behind his back. "I want to know what happened to my mother. You were there. I was not. You said you tried to report the neglect. I did. I want to know everything, every detail, from the first day you met her until the last." He paused. "I will pay you $10,000 for your time." Emily stared at him, her mouth slightly open. $10,000. It was a lifeline. It was an escape. It was more money than she had seen in 5 years. It was enough to disappear from Mark, from the city, from this entire life. "You'd pay me to talk," she whispered. "I'm paying you for the information I should already have, the information I wasn't here to get." His gaze was intense. "You were the only one who showed her kindness. I need to know what that looked like. I need to know what they did." There was a raw, unshielded grief in his voice that mirrored her own. He wasn't just a boss. He was a son who had lost his mother and was looking for answers. One night, he said, "Tell me everything. And in the morning, if you still want to leave, my driver will take you anywhere you want to go. New state, new city. You'll have the money. You'll be free." She looked at the elevator, then back at him. It was a deal with the devil. But she was already in hell. At least this devil was offering a way out. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "Okay." He nodded once, as if closing a business deal. "First, you should shower, eat. I want to get this over with." He studied her for a moment, then gestured to the sprawling black sofa. "As you wish." She sat on the absolute edge of the cushion, her feet planted on the floor, ready to run. He didn't sit next to her. He took an armchair opposite, close enough to hear, far enough to feel safe. For a long time. The only sound was the faint hum of the city, 50 floors below. "Where do I start?" she asked. "At the beginning. Tell me about my mother." And so she did. At first, her voice was thin and reedy, sticking to clinical facts, but as she spoke, she wasn't talking to Lorenzo Moretti, the feared mafia boss. She was talking about Maria. She hated the food, Emily began, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She said it had no soul. She said it tasted like gray. A flicker of something, a ghost of a smile, passed over Lorenzo's face. She used to say that about my father's cooking. That small, shared memory broke the tension. Emily relaxed, just a fraction, and leaned back. "She talked about you," Emily said, her voice softer. Lorenzo leaned forward, his focus absolute, his hands clasped between his knees. "What did she say?" She told me you were stubborn. She said you were a lion's heart. That's what she called it. She told me this story about how you found a stray dog when you were a boy, maybe 10, and it had a broken leg, and you hid it in your room for a week and you splinted its leg with popsicle sticks. Lorenzo looked down at his own hands, large and capable. He hadn't thought about that dog in 20 years. "She said your father was furious," Emily continued, her voice gaining a warmth that had been absent for months. "But she said she knew then that you were born to protect things. She was so proud of you, she missed you." Lorenzo's throat felt tight. He looked away, toward the city, his jaw working. "Go on." "She was so kind, even when she was in pain. The other nurses, they were rough. They'd come in, flip her, change the sheets, and leave. They didn't talk to her. They talked over her. But Maria, she'd thank them. She'd always thank them." Emily's own hands, chapped and red, began to twist in her lap. I started staying late, after my shift. I'd clock out, but I'd just go back to her room. She'd get scared when the sun went down. She said the nights were the longest. So I'd sit with her. I'd brush her hair. It was still so thick. She was looking at her own hands now, remembering the feel of the brush. She'd tell me stories about Sicily, about her grandmother's garden. She said she missed the smell of lemons. Emily's voice broke. "I snuck in a bottle of lemon-scented lotion. It was against the rules. But Miuha, she'd hold my hand and close her eyes and just breathe. She'd smile, and she'd tell me to tell her about my day, my boring, stupid day. She just didn't want to be alone." The story was tumbling out of her now. The guilt, the anger, the sorrow, and then the reports. I filed them because they weren't turning her, and they left her medication, her pain medication, on the counter for an hour, just out of reach. They said she was difficult. She wasn't difficult, she was dying. And they were lazy, and I tried. She was crying now, the silent, hot tears of failure. Her hands were shaking violently, a tremor that seemed to start deep in her chest. She couldn't stop them. Lorenzo watched her hands tremble. He saw the invisible, festering wounds she carried, without thinking, driven by an instinct he didn't recognize. He moved. He left the chair and sat on the sofa, not close, but closer. He reached out, his large, warm hand covering her two small, trembling ones. He didn't grab. He didn't squeeze. He just covered them. A gesture of weight, of stillness. "Breathe, Emily," he said. His voice was deep, a vibration that seemed to travel from his hand into hers. She gasped, as if struck. She snatched her hands back, scrambling to the far end of the sofa, her back hitting the armrest. The instinct was immediate, automatic. Touch was a threat. Touch was a precursor to pain. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her eyes wide with a new, fresh terror. Please, don't." Lorenzo froze. He saw the terror in her eyes, and it was not the same fear from the motel. This was older, deeper. He immediately pulled his hand back, resting it on his own knee. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice level, calm. She panted softly, watching him, a trapped bird watching a cat. He was a killer. He was a criminal. She knew that, but his eyes, They weren't Mark's. Mark's eyes were always hot, needy, demanding. Lorenzo's eyes were dark and deep and filled with a terrible, shared grief. She didn't run. She didn't move. She just stayed, breathing hard. From the far end of the sofa, he showed her the guest room. It was twice the size of her motel room, with a bed that looked like a cloud and its own bathroom made of white marble. "The door locks from the inside," Lorenzo said, standing in the hallway. It was a statement of fact, but also an assurance. "You are safe here. No one will bother you." She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Thank you." She shut the door and, with a trembling hand, turned the deadbolt. The click was the loudest, most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She showered for a long time, letting the scalding water wash away the grime of the motel, the smell of Mark's whiskey, the chill of the cemetery. She found a plain gray t-shirt and a pair of soft cotton pajama pants laid out on the bed, clearly new. She put them on and crawled under the heavy, pristine duvet. The sheets were so smooth they felt like water, but safety was a foreign country, and her body had not yet learned the language. Sleep came, but it was not rest. It was a dark, suffocating trap. She was in the motel room, the scrape at the lock, the crack of the wood. Mark's voice, slurred and angry. "I'm going to find you, Em. You can't hide." He lunged, his hand grabbing her hair, pulling her down. "No!" she screamed, thrashing against the sheets. "Let me go! Please, get away from me!" She jolted awake, sitting bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, her scream still echoing in the silent, dark room. The door to her room burst open. Lorenzo filled the frame, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. He'd clearly been asleep. He was wearing only a pair of dark sweatpants, his chest and shoulders bare, broad and shadowed. He saw her, huddled in the center of the massive bed, her eyes wide with terror. "It was just a dream," he said, his voice thick with sleep. I know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I woke you. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for." He started to back out, to give her privacy, to close the door. But as he moved, a sound tore from her throat, a small, involuntary, broken sob that she tried to swallow. It was the sound of a person at the absolute end of their rope. He stopped. He stood in the doorway for a long, silent moment, just looking at her. He walked into the room. He didn't turn on the light. He simply sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her, a solid, protective presence. "He can't find you here," Lorenzo said, his voice quiet but firm. "He can't touch you. I won't let him." That simple promise. It was the one thing she had craved for years. Not pity, not love, just safety, and hearing it spoken aloud by a man who had the power to make it true. It shattered the last of her defenses. The small sob turned into a storm. She bent in half, her body convulsing with a grief that was about so much more than Mark. It was about her parents, gone too soon. It was about the lost scholarships. It was about the exhaustion of being poor and scared and alone. It was about Maria. Lorenzo hesitated. This was not his world. Violence. He understood. Business. He mastered. But this raw, agonizing display of female sorrow was a foreign language. He turned toward her. In the dim light, he could see her, curled on her side, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. He made a decision. He slid fully onto the bed, his back against the headboard, his long legs stretched out over the covers. He was a mountain of warmth in the cool room. He didn't pull her. He didn't demand, "Emily?" His voice was soft, but it cut through her sobs. She looked at him, her face a mess of tears and wet hair, gently, almost awkwardly. He reached for her, pulling her by the shoulders until her back was resting against his chest. She was stiff, a coiled spring of fear, ready to bolt. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice a rough rumble in her ear. "You're safe. Just let it go." He was warm. He was so incredibly solid. His arms came around her, one resting loosely over her stomach, the other near her shoulder. It was not a sexual embrace. It was a brace, a human shield. It was a hold, not a trap, and she let go. She turned in his arms, pressing her face against the soft cotton of his shirt, and she wept. She fisted her hands in his shirt, her body shuddering, and she cried for her lost life, for the constant fear, for the crushing exhaustion. And he just held her. He didn't pat her back. He didn't offer platitudes. He just let his own steady, silent presence be an anchor in her storm. He tucked her head under his chin, his hand moving to the back of her head, his fingers spreading wide, just holding her skull, as if to keep her from flying apart. He breathed in the scent of his own soap on her skin, and the salt of her tears. He felt the crack in the cold, hollow place his mother's death had left behind, and it was filled, for a moment, with this small, trembling woman. She cried until there was nothing left but shuddering, hiccuping breaths. She went limp in his arms, the tension draining out of her, leaving her exhausted. She fell asleep, tangled in his embrace, her face pressed against his heart. Lorenzo Moretti, the man who ran the city from its shadows, did not move. He stayed awake, staring at the city lights glowing through the window, guarding her. And for the first time in a very long time, the penthouse did not feel cold. The next morning, Emily woke with a gasp, disoriented. The sheets were impossibly soft, the room cavernous and silent for a dislocated second. She thought the night before, the motel, Mark, Lorenzo, had been a nightmare. Then the memories flooded back, clear and sharp. She had fallen asleep in his arms, in his bed. No, she was in the guest room. She sat up. She was alone. Had he carried her? She couldn't remember. Her face burned. She remembered the feeling of his solid, warm chest against her back, the low rumble of his breathing, the absolute, unassailable feeling of safety. She showered and dressed in the same borrowed but new pajamas, not knowing what else to do. She crept out of the room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. The penthouse was vast in the daylight, a sterile glass box in the sky. She found him in the kitchen. He was not the man who had held her. This was Lorenzo Moretti, the boss. He was dressed in another perfect suit, this one a dark charcoal. He stood by the counter, reading a tablet, a phone pressed to his ear. "No," he said into the phone, his voice cold. "I don't want them audited. I want them dismantled. Find the holding company that owns the hospital group. I want the names of the board members. I want their financials, their partners, their wives' personal trainers. I want to know where every single dollar of administrative fees went." He listened, his face a mask of stone. "I don't care about the donation wing. I want the negligence reports, every one. From the last 5 years. Someone has been burying them. Find who." He hung up without a goodbye and looked up, his dark eyes landing on her. She froze, feeling like a field mouse spotted by a hawk. "Good morning," he said. It was not a question. "There is coffee. Food is in the refrigerator." He was all business. The night had been an anomaly, a moment of weakness. She was a problem he had solved, and now he was back to his real life, the shame, which had been at bay, returned with a vengeance. She was a charity case, a stray. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice small. "Lorenzo," he corrected her, his tone flat, as he scrolled through something on his tablet. "Lorenzo," she tried again, her hands twisting. I can't stay here." That got his attention. He looked up slowly. "We discussed this. You are not safe. I don't mean... I'm not ungrateful, but I can't just sit here in your beautiful apartment. I can't be this person you have to take care of. I don't want your money. I can't accept it." "It was a transaction," he said, turning back to his tablet. "You gave me information. I paid for it." "No," she said, and her voice was stronger now, fueled by a self-respect she thought she had lost. "It wasn't a transaction. It was me. Crying in your living room. I don't want to be a pet you rescued. I need a job. I'll clean. I can cook. I can organize. I'll pay you back for everything." Lorenzo looked at her for a long, silent moment. He saw the desperation in her eyes, but it was not for money or safety. It was for dignity. He had taken her from one cage, but in her mind he had just put her in another, prettier one. "I do not need a housekeeper," he said. Her shoulders slumped. "Oh, okay. Then I guess I need to leave. I'll be fine." "I did not dismiss you," he said, the old command tone returning. He thought for a second, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for a solution. His gaze landed on a door at the far end of the hall. "I have a task," he said. "If you insist on earning your keep, it is not a job. It is a personal matter." "Anything," she said, her relief so potent it was almost painful. He led her to the door. It opened into a room that was the exact opposite of the rest of the penthouse. It was warm, cluttered, and human. It was a library, with floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves, a worn Persian rug, and 2 comfortable, overstuffed armchairs, and boxes, dozens of cardboard boxes stacked in the corners. This was my mother's," he said, his voice losing its sharp edge. "Her things. I had them moved here from her house. I have not been able to go through them." He gestured to the boxes. "Journals, photographs, letters, decades of a life. I need it. Organized, put on the shelves, archived." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I cannot pay a stranger to do it. It must be someone who understands. Someone who loved her." He didn't say it, but she heard it. Tears sprang to Emily's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Of course. I can do that." "This will be your job," he said, all business again. "I will pay you the $10,000 as a fee for this work. It is a service, a contract. Is that acceptable?" She nodded, unable to speak. He was giving her a gift, wrapped in the language of a transaction so she could accept it. For the next 3 days, the library became her world. Lorenzo was gone, immersed in his shadowy war with the hospital. He left early. He came home late. She was alone, but not lonely. She was with Maria. She opened the boxes and a life poured out. She found photograph albums, a young, smiling Maria in Sicily, Maria and a hard-faced man who must have been Lorenzo's father, and hundreds of pictures of Lorenzo. A scowling, black-eyed boy in a mud-stained soccer uniform, a painfully thin teenager in a rented tuxedo, looking defiant, a young man, his face already hardening, his arm around his mother, the only person in the world he seemed to smile for, and the journals. Maria had written every single day. Her handwriting was a beautiful, looping script. Emily began to sort them by year, stacking them on the shelves. She tried not to read, but a passage would catch her eye. January 5th, 1998. Lorenzo is 13. He came home with a black eye. He said he fell. He lies, but he lies to protect. I fear this heart of his. It is too fierce for this world. I pray he finds someone to protect him from his own fire. Emily sat on the floor, her back against a stack of books, and wept, for the boy and the man. On the 4th night, he came home early. She didn't hear him. She was on a step stool, trying to fit a stack of leather-bound journals onto a high shelf. She always bought too many books. Emily yelped, nearly tumbling off the stool. Lorenzo's hand shot out, his grip strong and warm on her elbow, steadying her. "Sorry, I did not mean to startle you. I'm almost done with this." "This decade," she stammered, her skin tingling where he'd touched her. She stepped down. He looked around. The chaos was gone. The shelves were full, organized, chronological. His mother's life, in neat, perfect rows. "You've been busy," he said, his voice quiet. He pulled a small, cloth-bound book from a shelf. "Her first one. She wrote about you," Emily said, her voice soft. "She wrote about the dog with the broken leg." Lorenzo's ghost of a smile returned. "She never let me forget that. I think I got tetanus. And she wrote about you trying to negotiate with your 3rd-grade teacher for a better grade." His head snapped up, a dark flush on his cheeks. "She wrote that." Emily laughed, a real, genuine laugh. The sound was shocking in the silent penthouse. She said, "He offered her 2 weeks of his dessert. He's a terrible businessman, but a good son." Lorenzo actually chuckled, a low, rough sound that sent a strange vibration through her. He sat in one of the armchairs, the small journal still in his hand. He looked younger, less like a boss, more like the man in the photographs. Emily sat in the other chair. The air between them was different. It was not the charged silence of the car or the awkwardness of the kitchen. It was comfortable. She saved me, you know, he said, staring at the book in his hands, not looking at her. What do you mean? I was 14. My father had just died. His associates were dividing the spoils. I was not a good kid. Emily, I was angry. I was running with a crew that would have seen me dead or in prison by 16. I was on the streets, lost. He paused, and she could see the memory playing out in his eyes. My family had written me off. I was a lost cause. Too wild. Too much like my father, but not her. She found me in an alley after a fight. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just grabbed me by the ear and she dragged me home. She sat me at the kitchen table and she cleaned my face and she said, "You are a Moretti and we are not lost." She never stopped. She's the only reason I'm not a statistic. The confession hung in the air, a raw, vulnerable thing. He had given her a piece of his past, a piece that explained everything. "I know what it's like to be alone," Emily whispered. He looked at her, his gaze sharp, inviting her to go on. "I was 16 when my parents died, car accident." The words were old, worn smooth by time, but the ache was still there. The state. It's not like in the movies. You're not a person, you're cargo. You get moved from house to house. I got out. As soon as I was 18, I got into college. I was working 3 jobs. I was going to be a nurse. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. "Mark," she said, the name a small, bitter pill. "I met Mark. He was charming. He seemed so supportive. He said I shouldn't work so hard. He said he would take care of me." She gave a hollow, mirthless laugh. "And he did. He took everything, my savings, for a sure thing investment, my apartment, because he co-signed and then stopped paying, and my nerve. He made me believe I was worthless, that I was lucky to have him. By the time I realized I was in a trap, I didn't have the strength or the money to get out until I just ran." She was crying, but she wasn't sobbing. The tears just rolled down her cheeks, a quiet river of grief. "I've never told anyone that." Lorenzo moved from his chair and knelt in front of hers. He didn't touch her. He just knelt. His presence was a physical weight. "He was a fool," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "To look at you and see worthless." He saw a mirror. He reached up, his hand hesitant, and with the pad of his thumb, he brushed a tear from her cheek. His touch was rough, calloused, but gentle. It was not the hand of a man who just held. It was the hand of a man who acted. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She just watched him. The air in the room was too thick to breathe. It was charged with their shared histories, their confessions, their grief. He was looking at her, really looking at her, not as a witness, not as a victim, but as Emily. He leaned in. It was a slow, agonizingly deliberate movement. He was giving her time. Time to say no. Time to pull back. Time to run. She met him halfway. The kiss was nothing like she had ever known. It was not the sloppy, demanding kisses of Mark. It was not a kiss of passion. Not at first. It was a kiss of profound, desperate, shared loneliness. It was a question. His lips were firm and warm. They were gentle, testing. Her own parted on a shaky sigh, and that was all the invitation he needed. He moved his hand from her cheek to the back of her neck, his fingers lacing into her hair, and he deepened the kiss. It was still slow, but it was desperate. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving and a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be touched with kindness. It was everything they couldn't say. Her hands, which had been in her lap, came up to grip his shirt, her knuckles white, anchoring herself to him. He was the one who stopped. He broke the kiss, pulling back, but only an inch. His forehead rested against hers. His breathing was heavy, ragged. His eyes were closed. "Emily." His voice was rough, a raw sound in the quiet room. She opened her eyes. She was trembling. "This," he said, his voice strained. "This is not part of the deal. You don't need to repay me with this." She just stared at him, her heart doing a painful, erratic rhythm in her chest. He thought she was paying him? Then she understood. It was not an accusation. It was a release. He was giving her back her power. He was telling her this was her choice. He was, in his own way, protecting her, even from himself. He was not Mark. He was not the men who take the fragile, seedling bud of trust that had formed in the dark of her bedroom, blossomed. "I know," she whispered. Before he could respond, before she could find the words to explain that it had nothing to do with repayment, his phone vibrated on the table, a harsh, buzzing sound that shattered the intimacy. He pulled back, his face hardening, the mask of the boss sliding back into place. He glanced at the screen. "What is it?" He snapped into the phone. He listened. Emily watched as his entire body went still, a stillness that was far more terrifying than any rage. "Where?" he said. He listened again. "Keep him there, but do not touch him. Do not let him see you." "Is she safe?" He looked at Emily. "Yes, she's here. I'll handle it." He hung up. "Lorenzo?" Emily asked, rising from her chair. "What is it?" "The report on your ex came back," he said, his voice flat, all warmth gone. "My men have been tracking his associates. He's been seen lurking around your old diner, asking questions, asking about you." He walked to the door, his back to her. "You are not to leave the penthouse. It is not safe." The old Emily would have been terrified. The old Emily would have hidden. But the old Emily hadn't spent 3 days reading about a woman who fought for her son. And she hadn't just been kissed by a man who respected her. "No," she said. Lorenzo turned. "No? I'm not your prisoner. Lorenzo." She stood up, her legs shaking, but her voice was firm. There are things. In my old neighborhood. A storage unit. I have a box there. It's my mother's things. Her letters. The only photographs I have. It's all I have left. I'm not letting him keep that from me. I'm not letting him scare me away from that. I will send my men," he said. "No." She met his gaze. "They won't know what to look for. It has to be me. I have to do this. I'm not running anymore." He looked at her, a long, hard look, seeing the new, defiant strength in her. She was not the broken woman he had found in the cemetery. He had done this. He had given her safety, and she had used it to build armor. He didn't know whether to be proud or furious. "You will not go alone," and he said. It was not a request. "You will go, and I will be with you." The drive back to her old neighborhood was a journey into a life she had been running from. The city shifted, the gleaming towers and high-end boutiques giving way to pawn shops, check-cashing stores, and diners with faded vinyl booths. The air felt grittier here. Lorenzo's black armored sedan, which was silent and invisible in the wealthy parts of town, was a shark in a goldfish pond. People stared. Lorenzo drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He had not wanted to do this. He had argued, in his cold, controlled way, that he could send a team, that he could acquire the entire storage unit facility if he had to. She had refused. "It's not about the things, Lorenzo. It's about me. Walking in and taking them back. It's about me walking out again." He had understood, and that had scared her more than his anger. He understood the symbolism of it. He parked half a block from the storage facility, a run-down 3-story building of corrugated metal and rust. "I will be right behind you," he said, his voice a low growl. "No, please." She turned to him, her hand on the door. "Stay in the car. If he's here and he sees you, it'll be a fight. If he sees me, he'll just yell. I can handle yelling. I just want to get my box and go. Please, Lorenzo, let me do this my way." His jaw was a hard line of granite. "I will be watching. The moment I don't like, I am coming in." "Okay," she agreed. Just to placate him, She slid out of the car, feeling as though she had just stepped from a spaceship. The air smelled of exhaust and fried food. She clutched the key to the unit, its metal teeth biting into her palm, and walked toward the entrance, her steps feeling firm on the cracked pavement. She could feel his eyes on her back, a physical weight. Her unit was on the second floor, down a long, flickering hallway that smelled of dust and mildew. C-27. The roll-up door was stiff, and she had to put her shoulder into it. It shrieked in protest, the sound echoing in the silence, and there, in the dim, caged bulb light, was her life, or what was left of it. A few pieces of cheap, water-damaged furniture, a stack of collapsed cardboard boxes, and in the back, a small, plastic tub sealed with duct tape. "There you are," she whispered. She grabbed the tub, her heart thumping with a strange, victorious rhythm. She had done it. She had faced the past. She turned to leave, her arms wrapped around the plastic. "Find what you were looking for. Em?" She froze. The voice, like gravel and cheap whiskey, came from the end of the hallway. Mark. He stepped out from the shadow of the stairwell, blocking her only exit. He looked worse than she remembered, thinner. His eyes were bloodshot and hollow, but they burned with a familiar, toxic intensity. He was not drunk. He was, she realized with a cold spike of fear, sober and desperate. "Mark," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I'm just getting my things. Let me pass." "Let you pass?" He laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "Just like that? You walk out on me, disappear, and now you just waltz in here and take the last of your crap? I don't think so." "It's my mother's," she said, hugging the tub tighter. "It's just pictures. Please. Pictures." He took a step closer and she took an instinctive step back, her shoulders hitting the metal door of her unit. "You owe me, Emily. You owe me so much more than pictures." "I don't owe you anything," she said, her fear giving way to the cold, hard anger that had been building in her for days. "I gave you everything," he snarled, taking another step. He was close now. She could smell the stale cigarettes on his clothes. "I took care of you. I gave you a place to live, and you ran. You took my savings. Mark, you got me evicted. You hit me." The admission hung in the stale air. "And now what?" he sneered, his eyes dropping to her clothes. The simple, clean t-shirt and jeans Lorenzo's men had bought for her looked, in this place, like couture. "You're too good for me now? Is that it? Found someone new?" He lunged, his hand grabbing the front of her shirt, and slammed her back against the door. The plastic tub crashed to the concrete, the lid popping open, scattering a few old photographs onto the dirty floor. "Who is he, huh?" he spat, his face inches from hers. "My friend said you got into a fancy car, one of those black ones. You sleeping with criminals now, Em? Is that what you are? You think you're some mafia princess?" Tears of rage and terror pricked her eyes. "Let go of me. You belong to me," he growled, his grip tightening. "You always—" He never finished the sentence. A blur of black motion came from the stairwell. It was Lorenzo. He moved with a silence and speed that was animalistic. 1 second Mark was looming over her. The next he was ripped away, spun around, and slammed into the opposite wall with a sickening crack. Lorenzo's hand was at his throat. He didn't yell. He didn't make a sound. He just applied pressure. Mark's eyes bulged. His face went from red to a dusky purple. He clawed at Lorenzo's wrist, but it was like a manacle of steel. "Lorenzo," Emily whispered, her voice a reedy thing. "You put your hands on her," Lorenzo said. His voice was not loud. It was a cold, quiet vibration, more terrifying than any shout. He wasn't talking to Emily. He wasn't talking to Mark. He was stating a fact to the universe. He released his grip just enough for Mark to gasp a breath, then drove a single, brutal fist into his stomach. Mark folded, a soundless oof of air exploding from his lungs. Lorenzo didn't stop. He hit him again. A precise, devastating strike to the ribs, and a third, an open-palmed blow to the side of his head that sent him crumpling to the floor. It was not a brawl. It was an execution. It was public. It was fierce. And it was over in less than 10 seconds. Mark lay gasping on the concrete, curled in a fetal position, sobbing and choking. Lorenzo stood over him, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling in his dark shirt. The mask was gone. This was the man who had dragged himself out of the streets, the man whose heart was too fierce. He was terrifying. He was beautiful. A door down the hall creaked open. An old woman peered out. "What's going on out here?" Lorenzo didn't even look at her. He had eyes only for Emily. He turned his back on the man he had just broken, a complete dismissive turn, and walked to her. He stopped a foot away, his hands fisted at his sides, his whole body vibrating with contained violence. Emily was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her eyes were fixed on the scattered photographs. Lorenzo did not leave. He did not say, "It's done." He did not stalk off in a cloud of testosterone. He knelt. His movements were stiff, his suit jacket pulling tight across his broad shoulders. He knelt at her feet, and with his large, calloused, violent hands, he began to pick up the photographs of her mother. He gathered them, one by one, his touch surprisingly gentle. He picked up a picture of a smiling woman holding a baby. He picked up a faded, black and white photo of her parents on their wedding day. He stacked them neatly and placed them in the tub. Then he snapped the lid back on. He stood up, holding the plastic tub in one hand. He held out his other hand to her. Emily looked at the hand that had just beaten a man, now offering her past. She looked at his face, at the storm still raging in his dark eyes, a storm that was entirely and only for her. She put her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and strong. He pulled her to her feet, tucked her against his side, and with her mother's memories in his other hand, he walked her out of that building. He didn't look back. The car ride back to the penthouse was silent, but it was a new silence. It was not the awkwardness of their first night or the charged tension of the library. It was the silence of a thing that had been broken and reset. He set the tub in the middle of her guest room, a small plastic trophy. He stood at the door, watching her. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse, for getting my pictures." He nodded, his gaze heavy. "He will not come near you again." It was a promise, a vow sealed in blood and concrete. He left her then, and she knew he was giving her space. She showered, washing away the smell of dust and fear, and put on the soft, clean clothes. But she didn't feel like a victim. She felt anchored. That night, she did not wait for the nightmares. She found him in the living room. He was standing in the dark, in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights. He had taken off his suit jacket and tie, and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. The sleeves rolled up his forearms. He was a contradictory image of civilization and raw power. He heard her approach. "You should be sleeping, Emily." "I can't," she said. She walked up behind him, stopping just short of touching him. "All my life, men who said they wanted to protect me. They just wanted to own me. They wanted to put me in a cage. Mark, he said he was protecting me when he wouldn't let me see my friends. He said he was taking care of me when he took my money. It was all just to make me smaller." He turned to face her. His expression was guarded in the dark. "Today," she said, her voice shaking, You were violent. It was terrifying." "I am a terrifying man," he said, his voice flat. "Yes," she whispered. "But you didn't do it to make me smaller. You didn't do it to own me. You did it. And then you turned your back on him and you knelt down and you picked up my mother's pictures." She was crying, but these were not tears of fear. They were tears of recognition. "I am not like you," she said, taking a small, trembling step closer. "I hate violence. I hate what your world is, but..." She was close enough now to touch him, and she did. Her hand, small and shaking, came up and rested on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its steady, powerful beat. "I am not afraid of you." He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. His eyes were black pools, reflecting the city lights. slowly. Her fingers uncurled and moved from the center of his chest to the first button of his shirt. Her hands were trembling, her movements clumsy. He caught her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "Emily," he breathed, his voice a strained warning. "Don't, not as thanks, not for what I did." "This isn't thanks," she whispered. Her eyes locked on his. She pulled her hand from his grasp and, more boldly this time, undid the button. "This is choice. This is the first choice I've made in years. That feels completely, terrifyingly mine." She undid the next button. Her knuckles brushed his warm skin. He sucked in a sharp breath. He brought his hands up, not to stop her, but to frame her face. His palms were rough, his touch scalding. His thumbs stroked the high, sharp line of her cheekbones. He didn't kiss her. He just leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. They stood like that, in the dark, in the quiet, for an eternity, just breathing. She breathed in his scent, clean soap, starch, and something else, something uniquely him, something dark and male and safe. His breath was hot on her lips. She could feel her own, shallow breaths evening out, slowing until they were breathing in perfect matched rhythm, in, out. "I haven't felt safe in years," she whispered, the words so soft they were barely a vibration against his skin. I've been running and hiding and so tired for so long, and then you." That broke him. His mouth came down on hers. It was not the gentle, questioning kiss from the library. This was a kiss of pure, unadulterated need, a kiss that had been held back by grief and violence and respect, and was now, finally, uncaged. It was a claiming. His arms went around her, one hand at her waist, pulling her flush against him, the other splayed wide against her back, holding her as if he intended to never let go. She melted into him, her hands leaving his shirt to loop around his neck, her fingers tangling in his thick, dark hair. It was slow. It was desperate. It was a drowning woman finding air. He kissed her until her knees went weak, and he took her weight, lifting her slightly, his mouth moving from hers to her jaw, to the wildly beating pulse in her throat. "Lorenzo," she gasped, her head falling back. That one word, her breathing his name, was his undoing. He picked her up in one fluid, powerful motion, his arm under her knees, her back supported by his other. She didn't yelp, she just held on. He carried her from the living room, down the dark hall, past her guest room, and into his. His bedroom was like the rest of the penthouse, vast and dark, with one wall of glass looking out at the glittering, uncaring city. He set her on her feet beside the bed, but he didn't let her go, with a reverence that was completely at odds with the man who had beaten her ex. He undressed her. His large hands, trembling slightly, pulled her t-shirt over her head. He unfastened her jeans, his knuckles brushing her skin. He didn't rush. His eyes never left hers, watching her, gauging her, giving her every opportunity to say no. She met his gaze, and with her own trembling hands, she finished unbuttoning his shirt, pushing it off his broad shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. They fell asleep tangled together in the massive bed, the city lights glowing through the windows, a million tiny stars in their private sky. She was pressed against his side, his arm, a heavy, warm weight over her waist, her head on his chest. And for the first of what she knew would be many nights, she had no nightmares at all. The next day, she woke to an empty bed, but the indentation of his head was still on the pillow next to her. She felt different, not fixed, not whole, but settled. He was gone, to his work, to his war with the hospital. She was in the kitchen, making a real cup of coffee, not for him, but for her. When her phone buzzed, it was an unknown number. Her stomach tensed. "Hello? Is this Emily Carter?" The voice was a woman's, thin and terrified. "The one who was an aide at St. Jude's?" "Yes," Emily said slowly, her hand tightening on the warm mug. "Who is this?" You don't know me. My name is Brenda. I'm a nurse. I knew Maria Moretti. Emily's heart stopped. What about her? I saw what you wrote, the nurse whispered, and Emily could hear the sound of a car door closing. Your reports, the ones they lost. I know the truth about what happened to her. What truth? Emily demanded. It wasn't just neglect. Emily, the nurse said, her voice breaking. It was worse. They altered her medical records. She was allergic to a specific painkiller. They gave it to her. I think they wanted her to free up the bed. I have proof. I have the original chart. Emily sank onto a stool, the world tilting. Not neglect, murder. I want to go on record, the nurse stammered, but I'm so scared they'll ruin me. Or worse, you seem to care, and with her son, with who he is. What do you want? Emily asked, her voice cold and sharp. Meet me, the nurse said. Just meet me. I'll show you, and maybe you can protect me. Emily looked around the vast, silent penthouse, Lorenzo's fortress. Her first instinct was to scream, to call him, to tell him, but no, this was not his fight. Not yet. This was hers. This was the nurse. This was about Maria, and the promise she had whispered at her grave. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Lorenzo would come in with fire and blood. He would get the truth, but he would scare this woman into silence. Emily. Emily could be trusted. This was her world. This was her penance. Where? Emily said, her voice clear and strong. Tell me where to meet, and don't tell anyone. No one. Not even the police. She made the arrangements, a public coffee shop, in an hour. She hung up the phone. She did not call Lorenzo. She walked into her guest room, put on her sneakers, and for the first time, she walked out of the penthouse, alone. The Daily Grind coffee shop was loud, steamy, and aggressively normal. The smell of burnt coffee and sugar-free vanilla syrup hung in the air, a pathetic cover for the acidic tang of Emily's fear. She sat in a booth by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. A woman slid into the seat opposite her, her movements quick and bird-like. She was older than Emily had expected, at least in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes so hollow and terrified they looked like they had been bruised. Emily Carter? She whispered, her hands visibly shaking. Brenda? The nurse nodded, clutching a large, battered purse to her chest as if it were a shield. I shouldn't be here. They monitor our keycards. They see everything. You said you had proof, Emily said, keeping her voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the hammer beating against her own ribs. About Maria Moretti. Brenda licked her dry lips. I was the charge nurse that night, not the night she died, but 2 nights before, the night it all went wrong. From her purse, Brenda pulled a manila folder, not a thin one, but one thick with papers. She didn't slide it. She held it. I loved Maria, Brenda whispered, her eyes filling with tears. She was one of the good ones. She'd asked me about my grandkids. She remembered my son's name. The nurse took a gasping, shuddering breath. And I let this happen. What happened, Brenda? Tell me. It was Dr. Alistair, the head of the palliative wing. He's under so much pressure from the board. Manage costs, improve efficiency, reduce extended stays. That's all we hear. Maria, she was an extended stay. Brenda opened the folder. She pulled out 2 documents. This is the official chart, the one the lawyers have. It says Maria Moretti was resting comfortably. It says her self-reported pain was a 2. It says a low-dose medication was administered at 6 p.m. She then pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. It was a page from a nursing log, the kind with the blue lines, covered in frantic, scribbled handwriting. This is my original log, Brenda said, her finger tracing the words. My real log. I photocopied it before I shredded the book. I don't know why. I had to. Emily took the paper. She read the entry. 10 p.m. Room 402. Patient M. Moretti, crying out, severe, uncontrolled pain. Self-reported at a 9. Call button activated 4 times in 1 hour. Page doctor. Alistair for new orders. Doctor. Alistair. The entry stopped. What did he do? Emily breathed. He came to the floor, Brenda said, her voice dropping so low Emily had to lean in. He didn't go into her room. He came to the station. He told me the family was difficult, that the son was complicated. He said the hospital couldn't afford a situation. Brenda's hands were shaking so hard the table vibrated. I told him she needed a morphine drip, that the oral meds weren't touching her. He told me to manage the situation, and then he went into the system, into her file. What did he do? He didn't just deny the pain medication. Emily, Brenda choked out. He altered her allergy list. He added an allergy to morphine and hydromorphone. He flagged her as allergic to the only 2 drugs that could have helped her. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't an oversight. It was a death sentence. It was a deliberate, calculated act to ensure she couldn't receive care, so that when she died, the chart would look clean. Patient allergic to standard interventions, all other measures taken. I tried to give her something else, Brenda sobbed. But he had locked her chart. All I could give her was basically Tylenol, and I had to write in the official chart that she was resting. He stood over my shoulder while I did it. Emily closed her eyes. The guilt was a physical thing, a hand squeezing her throat. She'd been there. She'd seen the pain. She'd filed her own reports. But this was a conspiracy. This was a cover-up that went to the very top. I watched her, Brenda whispered. She didn't cry out again after midnight. She just stopped. She just gave up, and I let it happen. I didn't want to lose my pension. I have grandkids. Brenda, Emily said, her voice sharp, cutting through the woman's spiraling panic. She reached across the table and grabbed the nurse's trembling hands. You're not letting it happen now. You're here. Brenda looked up, her eyes desperate. I will go on record. I will testify. I will give you this. She pushed the folder across the table. But you have to protect me. You have to promise me. They will ruin me. Or worse, her son. They say he's dangerous. He is, Emily said, her voice hard. He's dangerous to people like them. He's not dangerous to us. Emily's hand closed over the folder. You did the right thing, Brenda. Now, go home. Lock your doors. Don't answer the phone. Someone will be in touch. You will be safe. I promise you. Brenda nodded, her face a mask of terror and relief. She slid out of the booth and vanished into the morning crowd. Just another anonymous woman in a coffee shop. Emily sat there for another minute, the folder feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. She had it, the truth. It was so much uglier than she had ever imagined. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was the longest of her life. Her hand, clutching the folder, was shaking. She had done it. She had done it herself. She had faced the ghost of her past, her own failure, and she had found the weapon to win the war. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Lorenzo was standing in the center of the living room, his arms crossed. He was not in a suit. He was in the same black t-shirt and dark pants he had worn in her nightmares, the ones that made him look less like a CEO and more like a panther. He had clearly been waiting. The air in the room was electric, vibrating with a cold, controlled fury that sucked all the oxygen from her lungs. Where were you? It was not a question. It was a stone-cold, flat accusation. Emily's voice faltered. Her courage from the coffee shop evaporated under his gaze. You left, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You walked out of this building, the one place on earth I know you are safe, without your phone, without a word, without me. I had to, she said, holding up the folder. Lorenzo. I have it. I have the proof. A nurse. Brenda. Emily's blood ran cold. You knew? I knew, he said, his voice a low growl, that an unknown number called your phone. I knew that you walked out of this building like you were going to a fire. I knew you met a terrified nurse in a public coffee shop. My men were in the booth behind you. You spied on me, she accused, her fear turning to anger. I protected you, he roared, and the sound was the breaking of a storm. The controlled, civilized man was gone, and the boss, the predator, the man from the streets, was in his place. He stalked toward her. What if she hadn't been a nurse? Emily. What if it was a trap? What if it was Alistair, the doctor whose life I am currently tearing apart? What if he'd sent someone? What if it was a reporter? What if... He stopped in front of her, his entire body rigid. What if it was him? Mark is gone. He's not gone, Lorenzo yelled. He's an animal, a desperate one, and you walked out. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip iron. It wasn't meant to hurt, but it was a vice. You of all people, you know what I am. You know what this world is. You cannot be this reckless. It wasn't reckless, she shouted back. Tears of rage and frustration springing to her eyes. She shoved at his chest, but it was like hitting a wall. It was necessary. She was terrified. She's a nurse. Lorenzo, not a criminal. She wouldn't have met with you. She wouldn't have trusted a man like you. All suits and danger. She trusted me. She met with the aide who saw it, the one who knew. I could have handled it. No, you would have scared her. You would have come in with your threats and your power, and she would have run. This was my world, my failure. This was my responsibility. I was the one who couldn't save her. I had to be the one to find this, not you, me. She was sobbing now, hitting his chest with her free hand, the folder clutched in the other. This was mine. Why don't you understand that? I had to do this myself. Her words hit him, harder than her fists. He let go of her, stumbling back as if she had struck him. He raked his hands through his hair, turning away from her, his back a rigid wall of muscle. He was shaking, not with rage, with something else. You should have trusted me, he whispered, his voice broken, unrecognizable. I trust you, she cried. This wasn't about trust. No, he said, turning around, his face. The mask was gone. The fury was gone. All that was left was a raw, gaping wound. His eyes were wide and terrified. I can't, he choked out, his voice cracking. I can't do it again. Do what? She whispered, her anger vanishing, replaced by a cold dread. Lorenzo. What? What's wrong? I can't bury someone, he said, and a pained, desperate sound tore from his throat. My father, my mother. I held her hand, and I let her go. He was looking at Emily, but he was seeing a ghost. I cannot, he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper, his entire body trembling. I am terrified of losing anyone else I love. The words hung in the air, the city noise, the hum of the penthouse. Everything went silent. The folder slipped from her numb fingers, scattering the damning evidence of Maria's murder across the pristine marble floor. He had said it. Emily froze. She stopped breathing. The man who had been a fortress of rage was now just a man, exposed and terrified. What? What did you say? She whispered. Lorenzo looked at her, his eyes dark with the admission, his jaw working as if he was trying to take the words back. But they were out. They were between them. Lorenzo, she said, her voice trembling. You love me. His face, which had been a mask of grief, shuddered. He was exposed. He looked ashamed. He took a step back, a retreat, but she didn't let him. The distance between them was a chasm, filled with his mother's ghost and her own fear. She crossed it. She launched herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck, burying her face in the warm, safe skin of his throat. I'm sorry, she sobbed, clinging to him. I'm sorry, I had to. I'm so sorry. I'm safe. I'm here. For a second, he was rigid, a statue of shock. Then, his arms came around her, crushing her. He grabbed her as if she were a lifeline, his hands fisting in her shirt, his face burying in her hair. He held her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack, and she didn't care. He was shaking. The strong, unmovable, terrifying Lorenzo Moretti was shaking in her arms. "Don't," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken plea against her ear. Don't you ever walk out that door again. Don't. He wasn't angry. He wasn't giving a command. He was begging. She pulled back, just enough to see his face. Her hands came up to frame his jaw, her thumbs wiping at the moisture on his cheeks, or maybe it was her own tears. "I'm here," she whispered, her heart breaking for him. "I'm safe. I'm not going anywhere. When my man called, when he said you were gone." He couldn't finish the sentence. He just squeezed his eyes shut, his forehead resting against hers. "Shh," she said. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation. It was salty and wet and fierce. It was a kiss that said, "I am alive. You are alive. We are here." He kissed her back, his mouth devouring hers. It was a raw, claiming, terrified kiss. He backed her up, his steps clumsy until she hit the cold, hard marble of the kitchen counter. He caged her there, his hands in her hair, his mouth on hers, as if he could absorb her, keep her safe inside his own skin. His heart was hammering against her, a wild, frantic rhythm that matched her own. Her fingers gripped his arms, his shoulders, clinging to him, anchoring him. "I'm here," she gasped, when he finally broke the kiss to press his face to her throat. "I'm right here. Promise me," he rasped, his arms wrapped around her waist, holding on like he was a drowning man. "Promise me, Emily, no more. No more doing it yourself. Us, she whispered, her heart finally feeling like it wasn't broken. "I promise." They stayed there, in the kitchen for a long time, just breathing. The evidence of his mother's murder lay scattered on the floor, forgotten for a moment, as the two of them, finally, held on. The next day, the storm had passed. They were a unit. Lorenzo was on the phone, his voice the cold, sharp steel of the boss. "The nurse is secure. My lawyers have her in a safe house. She's given her deposition. The board meeting is set for this afternoon. I'm not asking. Alistair, I am telling you, you will be there." He hung up and looked at Emily. He was in a dark, perfect suit. He looked like the man from the cemetery, but his eyes were different. They were hers. "It's time," he said. "The car is downstairs. We are going to end this together." He held out his hand. She took it. Her hand, small and pale, in his large, dark, and powerful one. They rode the elevator down, not to the garage, but to the main lobby. It was a statement. They were not hiding. The doors hissed open. The lobby was all glass and steel. His driver was holding the main door open for them, the black car idling at the curb. They were hand in hand, a united front. They pushed through the revolving glass door and stepped out onto the sun-drenched, noisy sidewalk. The city air was cool. Emily squinted, a small, real smile touching her lips. She felt strong. "Emily," the voice. Her blood turned to ice. It was a nightmare, a ghost. She turned. Standing by a newspaper kiosk, not 20 feet away, was Mark. He was a wraith. His clothes were torn, he was shaking, and his eyes were wild, dilated, and inhuman. He was not the beaten man from the storage unit. He was a desperate, cornered animal. And he had a gun. "Lorenzo, no!" Emily screamed, as Lorenzo saw it, moving instinctively to shove her behind him. But Mark was fast. He wasn't after Lorenzo. He was after her. He lunged, closing the distance in 3 frantic steps. He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her out of Lorenzo's grasp, and spun her around, pulling her tight against his chest. The cold, round, unmistakable barrel of the gun pressed hard against her temple. "You!" Mark shrieked, his voice cracking, the sound hysterical. He was pointing the gun at her, but his eyes were on Lorenzo. You think you can... You ruined me. You took her. You took everything." Emily was frozen. The smell of sulfur and unwashed desperation flooding her senses, the cold steel a burning, icy spot on her skin. Lorenzo stood 5 feet away, his hands raised slightly, his body completely, terribly still. His face was a mask of a calm so absolute, so pure. It was more terrifying than any rage. It was the face of a killer. "Let her go," Lorenzo said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're gonna pay me," Mark screamed, his arm tightening around her throat, the gun pressing harder. "You're gonna pay me for everything." The city noise seemed to die, sucked into the vacuum of the standoff. The barrel of the gun was a perfect, cold circle of death pressed against Emily's temple. Mark's arm was a vice around her throat, his body shaking with a desperate, drug-fueled energy. He was an animal, cornered and rabid. Lorenzo stood 5 feet away. He was unarmed. His men, the driver and a second man who had just exited the passenger side, were frozen, their hands on their own weapons but unable to shoot, the risk of hitting Emily too high. "Let her go," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, calm, impossibly steady thing. He took a single, slow step forward, his hands raised, palms open. "This is not her fight. This is between you and me." "Don't move!" Mark shrieked, his voice cracking. He yanked Emily's head back, the gun pressing so hard it would leave a ring. You think you're a big man, huh? You ruined me. I had things going. You broke me. You took her. She was mine." "She was never yours," Lorenzo said, his voice dangerously soft. "She doesn't belong to anyone. Let her go. Mark, walk away. I will give you money. I will give you anything you want." He was begging. The most powerful man in the city was begging a broken, desperate man, but it was not begging from a place of weakness. It was a strategic, controlled, lethal negotiation. "I don't want your money," Mark spat, foam gathering at the corner of his mouth. I want her. I want you to watch. I want you to see what you took. You think you're better than me? You're just like me. But with fancy suits, you're a criminal." "You're right," Lorenzo said, taking another fractional step. The pavement felt like a mile-long tightrope. "I am, but I am not the man who puts his hands on her. Let her go, and you can have me." Emily's heart was a bird trapped in her chest, beating its wings against her ribs. She was suffocating, not just from Mark's arm, but from the terror. But a strange, cold clarity was cutting through the panic. She looked at Lorenzo. His eyes were not on the gun. They were on her. He was looking at her, his gaze a physical, steadying force. It was the same look from the storage unit. It was the same look from the penthouse. It said, "I am here. I will not let you fall." And in that moment, she realized what he was doing. He was not just negotiating. He was distracting. He was giving her an anchor. He was trusting her. Mark was ranting, his words a stream of paranoia and rage. "And she owes me. She thinks she's a princess." He was lost in his own victimhood. He was weak. Lorenzo's eyes flickered, just a fraction down to her arm. It was all the signal she needed. She was not the girl from the motel. She was not the girl from the storage unit. She was the woman who had faced down a corrupt hospital. She was the woman who had slept in the arms of a lion. Her choice. Mark's grip was tight on her throat, but his other hand, the one with the gun, was slick with sweat. She stopped breathing. She went limp, a dead weight for one. Single. Second. He grunted, his grip instinctively adjusting, and in that second she exploded. With all the force she possessed, she drove her elbow, sharp and bony, backward into his solar plexus. Whump! A pained, guttural sound exploded from Mark's lungs. His arm around her throat loosened, his entire body convulsing from the crippling, unexpected blow. It was all the time Lorenzo needed. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wait. The second her elbow connected, he was moving. He was not a man in a suit. He was a projectile. He was the boy from the streets who had learned to fight to survive. He launched himself across the pavement, tackling them both. It was a tangle of limbs, a crash of bodies on the hard concrete. The gun fired. The sound was a deafening, sharp crack that echoed off the glass buildings, a sound that split the day in two. Emily screamed, not in fear, but in pure, raw adrenaline. She was on the ground, free of Mark's grasp. Lorenzo was on top of him, his fist connecting with Mark's face. Once. Twice. A third time. The gun skittered across the sidewalk, coming to a stop by a potted plant. Lorenzo's men were on Mark in a second, hauling a dazed, whimpering, and now unarmed man to his feet, cuffing him with a brutal, practiced efficiency. Sirens, already close, wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. Lorenzo's men would be gone before they arrived, leaving Mark as a gift. Lorenzo didn't move. He was on his knees on the sidewalk, breathing hard, his head bowed. Lorenzo? Emily's voice was a thin, reedy thing. She scrambled to him on her hands and knees. Lorenzo, are you... She saw it. The left sleeve of his pristine, dark suit jacket was darker. A patch, just below the shoulder, was blooming. It was wet. It was red. "You're shot," she whispered, her hands shaking, her voice hollow with a new terror. "Oh my God, you're shot. It's nothing," he grunted, but his face was pale, a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. "It's a graze. It stings." He looked up at her. His eyes were clear, his gaze intense. He looked at her, then at the man being dragged away, then back at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "Me?" she asked, her voice hysterical. You're bleeding, and you're asking if I'm hurt. Emily." He grabbed her hand, his grip tight. "Are you hurt?" "No," she sobbed. "No, I'm... And the dam broke. The adrenaline, the fear, the fight, the day, it all came crashing down. She collapsed onto the pavement, her legs giving out, and she just sobbed. She put her face in her hands and cried, the sound a raw, ugly animal wail of a person who had been pushed too far. Lorenzo, wounded, his arm bleeding, his suit ruined, did not stand up. He crawled the last 2 feet. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her against his chest, right there on the dirty city sidewalk, in front of God and everyone. He held her. He held her as she shook, as she fell apart. He held her, his chin resting on the top of her head, his eyes closed, a grim, pained, and infinitely tender expression on his face. You tackled him." She wept into his chest, her words muffled. "No," he whispered, his voice a low, rough rumble. He pulled back, just enough to look at her, his hand, his non-bloody one, coming up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her tear-streaked cheek. "You saved yourself, Emily," he said, his voice thick. You fought. You did what I couldn't. You elbowed him." A small, pained smile touched his lips. "You saved yourself. I'm just here to keep you safe now." She looked at him, at his wounded shoulder, at his fierce, devoted, loving eyes, and she believed him. Days later, the world was different. The gunshot had been a graze, as he'd said. It had required 3 stitches and a sling, which he'd worn for exactly 1 day before his pride, and his tailor had discarded it. Mark was in jail, facing a slew of charges that Lorenzo's lawyers had ensured would stick, but today was the real victory. Emily sat in the front row of a sterile, wood-paneled boardroom. Lorenzo was beside her, his hand resting on her knee, a silent, solid weight. At the head of the long, polished table sat the board of St. Jude's Hospital. They were pale, older men in expensive suits, their faces a mask of forced composure. Dr. Alistair was there, his face ashen, his hands visibly trembling. And at the witness stand, her voice clear and no longer afraid, was Brenda. He told me to manage the situation, she said, looking not at Lorenzo, but at Emily. He altered her chart. He locked me out. He did it on purpose. She presented the logs. She presented her testimony. Lorenzo's lawyers presented the financial reports, the ones that showed Alistair receiving a performance bonus for cost reduction just 2 days after Maria died. It was a slaughter. By the end of the day, doctor. Alistair was in handcuffs. The hospital's board was facing a massive lawsuit, not just from Lorenzo, but a class action suit from a dozen other families his lawyers had unearthed. The story, a hospital of horrors, was the lead on every local news channel. Justice. It wasn't clean or pretty. It was a war, and they had won. But it was not the end. Lorenzo did not just destroy the old, he built the new. He didn't just sue the hospital. He bought it. He tore it down, and in its place, he built the Maria Moretti Memorial Foundation. It was not a hospital. It was a hospice. It was a center for elderly care, a place where the staff-to-patient ratio was 1-to-1, where every room had a view of a garden, and where, in the center atrium, there was a small grove of lemon trees. It was a monument built not of anger, but of love. The day it opened, Lorenzo was not there for the ribbon cutting. He was not there for the speeches. He was with Emily. The air in the cemetery was cool. The late afternoon sun casting long, gentle shadows. It was quiet, peaceful. The anger that had once vibrated in this place was gone. Lorenz knelt, his hand resting on the polished black granite of his mother's grave. He placed a small, perfect white rose at the base. Emily knelt beside him. She was not the weeping, broken woman who had been here all those months ago. She was calm. She was whole. She placed her own rose, a soft, pale pink, next to his. She looked at the name, Maria Moretti, and the ache was still there, a small, familiar stone in her heart. But the guilt was gone. She leaned her head on Lorenzo's shoulder, and she whispered the words that had been sitting in her heart. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered, her words for Maria and for herself. "But your son did. He fixed it. He fixed it all." Lorenzo, who had been staring at the stone, his face a mask of love and loss, turned his head. His own arm came around her, his hand settling on her waist, pulling her close. He pressed his forehead against hers, his dark, intense eyes looking deep into hers. "No," he said, his voice rough with an emotion that still, after all this time, shook him to his core. He didn't. You did." He took her hand, the one that had fought, the one that had held his, and he kissed her knuckles. You saved me, Emily, from the anger, from the man I was becoming. You were the one who saw her. You were the one who cared. He kissed her, a soft, reverent, and endless kiss. Right there in the shadow of his mother's love. "You saved us both," he whispered against her lips. He stood, pulling her to her feet. He kept her hand in his, their fingers lacing together. And for a long, silent moment, they stood. Two souls who had found each other in the dark, now standing in the light. Then they turned, and hand in hand, they walked away from the grave, toward the setting sun, toward the city, toward the future they would build together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey of love, danger, and redemption. We would be honored if you would take a moment to comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories, for many more tales of passion and peril. And finally, please share your thoughts on Lorenzo and Emily's story. We read every comment, and your feedback means the world to us. Thank you for being a part of our community.